We open to Neelix recording a log on the Delta Flyer, so naturally, he's been paired with Tuvok. It's been a good long while since the last attempt to make them as fun as Odo and Quark failed, so it looks like we're having another go. It's all as entertaining as it has been for the last 5 seasons, so Tuvok goes to the rear compartment to fantasize about throttling the bastard. Again. Some activity on a screen catches his eye, and after confirming that it wasn't Neelix, he investigates. Somebody's downloading data from the computer, and that somebody is the cloaked arsehole who poops blue at Tuvok. Neelix investigates the noise and calls Voyager when he finds Tuvok having a nap. They must have been close by as we move to sickbay. The doctor does doctor things and stops Tuvok from carking it, but he's in bad shape. Neelix doesn't have anything to add about who done it, as he didn't get a chance to check for cloaked thingies. Treating Tuvok's going to require knowing what happened to him. With nothing else to go on, we decide to have a chat with the people Neelix and Tuvok were visiting for a trade mission. Maybe they might have an idea of who our invisible assailant was. That's why we're talking to this guy, who's been given not only lines but also a name and a rank, so we'll assume they're important. Let's make him our own with a new moniker. The name our wheel bestows upon you is... Tapken Rathkin Wainjay by Ensign Johannes 275, and may the gods have mercy on my tongue. Rathkin, which is what I'm going to call them whenever I can get away with it, is alien Popo. The good news is he thinks he knows the culprit, or at least the species anyway. They're called the benth, and you know that they're serious because there's an apostrophe in the name. They're secretive and xenophobic, so basically turbo-Romulans. He also says that sightings are so scant that most people don't believe in them, which is why they weren't warned. In fact, he had to pull some strings to get the assignment, as he has a personal interest, having investigated the previous 12 alleged incidents. It would appear that Tapken Rathkin Wainjay is somewhat of an alien Mulder, which I'll admit has a certain comical irony to it. Anywho, the previous incidents all involved non-native species to the area, ships that were just passing through. That's quite the coincidence, and Rathkin thinks the benth are trying to learn about them, perhaps to assess any potential threat. This would also tie in with the data download Tuvok interrupted. Janeway's willing to give Rathkin a chance, and after a quick science of Tuvok with a gizmo he brought, they go to run it over the Delta Flyer too. Neelix stays in sickbay wanting to help with Tuvok's recovery. It's a long shot, but the doc suggests familiarity may provoke a response. Sounds or smells could be the trigger that pulls him back to consciousness, so naturally Neelix approaches things with his usual measured restraint. The Vulcan-chanting monks are a bit much for the doc, but Tuvok seems to like it as he's sitting up in bed. An attempt by the doc to scan him causes some distress, until Neelix proves that it's harmless by running it over himself. A rare double win for Neelix. More good news from the Delta Flyer. Tapken Rathkin Wainjay has brought along a gizmo that looks like it belongs in a Manta Force playset. The real purpose is to do a science, as it can use residual other science to show us what those turbo-Romulans look like. The result is bollocks, so Seven gives it a poke and does a better job. Even more promising, Janeway thinks we can plug this gizmo into Voyager and use it to uncover their ships. If we can get close enough, anyway. Catching one of the betentacled bastards is still the best way for sorting Tuvok. He's made progress but is still far from his original self, having not yet recovered the power of speech. In fact, we don't yet know if he recognizes any of us. Neelix wants to turn his double win into a hat-trick and is going to take Tuvok on a tour of the ship. First stop is the bridge, where he almost launches some fireworks. Frankly, I think that's on the rest of the crew for letting him have a play with the weapons console. Instead, Neelix takes him to Tuvok's quarters, where the worst he can do is shoot people with that bow. He may soon need more than a bow. We're ready to try the cloaky science thing, and it uncovers a ship sat right in front of us. It's a curious choice of position when we're travelling forward at nearly 20,000 kilometres a second. That's according to Janeway's previous order anyway, but let's ignore that for now. After all, the show has, based on the external view of Voyager, the impulse engines are off according to the lack of glow, whilst multiple benth ships fly around us. We try and call them, but they choose to communicate via poop, then try and scarper. We give chase to one of them while it continues to poop blue at us, all of which is scaring the shit out of Tuvok. Just as well, then, that they manage to elude us, and before we can do a science to figure out their cloaking tech so we can see them from a distance. That's not good news in the long run, but at least Tuvok perks up at the end of the fight. So much so that he even has a bit of a natter with Neelix. Now Tuvok's talking, Tapkin Rathkin Waynjay wants to interrogate him. Captain Catherine Janeway, on the other hand, is more inclined to tread carefully, based on the opinion of Neelix, who advises caution. And what better way to provide a non-threatening environment than by all crowding round him and telling him to think about a traumatic event? He sees a fragment of memory, one of him scanning for the cloaking jobby we want so we can find the beneth ships. That memory becomes one of him getting pooped on, or more accurately, the tricorder getting pooped on and him being fucked up in the process. Rathkin tries to push him, but Janeway intervenes, sending him to Astrometrics to see if he and Seven can find the cloaking thingy another way. Once he's gone, she asks Tuvok if he'd like to have dinner with her later. He seems to have imprinted on Neelix, though, and says he would prefer to stay with him. Rather than expand the meal to 3 people, she instead cancels, perhaps afraid that Neelix would insist on cooking. We move to the mess hall where Neelix is trying to jog Tuvok's memory again, this time with the help of Kim and a game of Vulcan Kerplunk. It goes terribly and Tuvok loses his shit. It's a theme he repeats in sickbay after learning about himself before the injury. Seeing all the things he was and the feelings of inadequacy at what he is now prompts frustration and anger. Even Neelix is unable to calm him and the doc takes over, perhaps with the aid of some sleepy juice. A dejected Neelix returns to the mess hall, currently occupied by Seven. She's trying to figure out how to find the beneth without details about their cloaking what's-it. Doing it without the data Tuvok gathered is proving quite the challenge. Indeed, it's as challenging as helping Tuvok recapture what he was, the problem Neelix has. Seven offers a different perspective, and one with which she's intimately familiar. Attempting to recapture something lost is not always the best course of action. Adapting to what is instead of chasing what was may offer better results. Tuvok's sorry for being angry at Neelix and has made a gift to apologize. Learning that this is something Tuvok of the past would never have done helps him feel a little better, though he's surprised to discover that they weren't friends before his injury. Neelix explains how things were between them, and Tuvok concludes that the old version of him was a bit of a cock. Bollocks to logic and meditation and all that wank, let's do things Neelix likes. Chief among Neelix's passions is cooking, though I suspect the crew would argue that passion doesn't necessarily equate to skill. Tuvok's taken to it very well indeed, though, seeming to have a knack for creating dishes from unexpected combinations and focusing entirely on desserts. Janeway arrives, perhaps having heard that the mess hall has finally started serving something edible. While she's there, she asks Tuvok if he's remembered anything. There's something in there, but he can't quite grasp it. She pushes a touch too hard, causing Neelix to intervene, but Tuvok's managed to sketch his memory onto the top of a cake with a bag of goo. The patchy red wibble is, apparently, precisely the data they need to track the beneth cloaking gubbins, which... oh, go on then, why not? We use the data source, a little wordplay there for the people who use subtitles, to identify one of the beneth cloaking whatsits and go to check it out. It's a big one too, and I'm not sure that's a smart choice tactically, but I guess Voyager doesn't currently have its tactical guy, so we'll forgive them. A flashy pulse thing from Voyager reveals a station and an arseload of ships, who all immediately target us, obviously. Janeway's clearly considered this possibility and tells them that if they don't knock it off, we'll broadcast their location to the homeworld of Tapkin Rathkin Waynjay. This makes them a touch more compliant, and they give us a call back. Janeway wants data on the weapon they used to fuck up Tuvok, but they're not exactly delighted by the idea of sharing. Janeway's thought of this too, and is willing to exchange it for tactical data on a number of other species, precisely the sort of thing they invade other ships to gather, as they did with us. Of course, this is a massive ethical breach on her part, and possibly Prime Directive violations for multiple species too, but we already know she's willing to straight up do a murder for Tuvok, so this is hardly a surprise. There is one sticking point, however, the presence of Rathkin. They know about him and his attempts to uncover them. As they start to bring their weapons back online, he offers them the gizmo that was able to counteract their cloaking tech. Seems to me like we're handing a shitload of power to an openly hostile species, but it isn't our backyard, so fuck 'em. Time to re-Tuvok our Tuvok. There's a slight problem though. New Vok doesn't particularly like the sound of old Vok. He knows he won't be able to continue having fun with Neelix once he's treated. Despite his own personal investment, Neelix is able to convince him that it's the best choice for Tuvok and everybody else. We move to the sickbay, and Neelix assures him that they'll see each other after the treatment, as the doc begins. Later in the mess hall, Tuvok arrives in business mode. He's non-committal when Neelix tries to engage in conversation, but doesn't straight up tell him to get fucked, so that's a start. He declines the offer of champagne and the request to make a dessert for his party later, but the latter prompts him to think of an alternative answer to a riddle Neelix posed him at the very start of the episode, the one that pissed him off so much that he went into the back of the ship to get away from Neelix. The answer pleases Neelix with its complete lack of logic, and we leave them to be kind of friends, but not really, as we fly away. We leave the episode with an interesting possibility. Does Tuvok secretly want to toss away all of his Vulcan training and just have a laugh with Neelix? The last exchange of the show gives a suggestion of this, a hint to Neelix that the Tuvok we saw when freed from restraint was not entirely gone. Does that idea stand up to much scrutiny? Well, not really. Attempting to reframe the interactions of main characters after 5 seasons is something that would require the sort of long-term planning that we know was not present in Voyager. But it's a fun thought, and that, ultimately, is what we're here for. There's a line in this episode that caught in my mind when I heard it. When reintroduced to Cal-To, Vulcan Kerplunk, new Tuvok says, "I like the way it looks now." On the surface, that could be construed as a simplistic view of things, but there's more going on. It shows an appreciation for how things are, rather than a need to impose order on the chaos of nature. There's an argument to be made that this is the more mature of the two approaches, perhaps even the more logical, seeing the value of a thing for its own sake, rather than as the basis of something else. It's certainly the better route to contentment. It is, I suspect, a deliberate parallel with new Tuvok himself. He's the pile of pieces rather than the sphere they can create. Different, but just as valid in his own way, if you stop comparing him to the end result you've assumed he should become. And what we had in new Tuvok was essentially everything Neelix had ever wanted. Tuvok has consistently provided the singular brick wall to his jovial nature, at least from what we've seen. Maybe Ensign Conspicuous thinks he's a dick too, but they've never shown us that, so let's ignore it. We could probably go off on a tangent about why Neelix feels the need for everybody to be visibly happy, and explore how that could be an attempt to recapture an idealized memory of his lost family, but the fact that he was willing to give it up is more interesting. I wonder if the Neelix we first met, the one that was in a frankly unhealthy possessive relationship, would have been as willing to let new Tuvok go. Another tick, then, under the heading of character growth. And we should probably include the Doc under that heading too, initially somewhat dismissive of Neelix when he starts trying to diagnose and treat Tuvok. He changes when he hears the sincerity in Neelix's voice. That's not the abrupt manner he had when first brought online, and we should give some points for it. Before we finish, and while we're on the topic of continuity, we should probably note that the flowers were a nice callback as well. That might seem un-Vulcan, but we previously learned that he was a prize-winning orchid breeder. In fact, that was the trait he gave to Voyager's favourite murder bastard, Lon Suda, after melding with him. The flowers we see in the story are lilies, from what I can tell, but the strength of this one has made me feel generous, so we'll still count it. End of episode.
What does that leave us with then?
I don't know. I can't think of anything else he uses on holodeck. Not on his own, anyway.
Bugger. Can we trick him into one?
I mean, not without involving other people, no.
Well, I could ask the leprechauns in the vents to try.
No, not after last time. They're a bloody menace.
It was a genuine accident. They want to help, and I think they are the best choice for stuff like this. Seriously. I'll go and have a word.
Are you sure about this?
Absolutely.
12 seconds later.
In my defense, this is just as much your fault for trusting the opinion of a computer, in a cartoon dog without a face. Woof.